This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome. If you've listened to our podcast before, you know we try to keep you up to date on travel trends. We introduced you to house sitting in podcast 26 to save money on hotels and Airbnb, and we took you on a mom's tour at a U.S. airport in podcast 25. Today we're covering another trend, the sharing economy. You may have used Airbnb, Uber, or TaskRabbit, but have you heard of Hipcamp? Our guest today is the inspiration behind it. Alyssa Ravasio is the founder and CEO of Hipcamp. She joins us today from the startup's headquarters in San Francisco. Alyssa, welcome to the Voyage Report podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So you're a traveler yourself, and I'm really interested to hear then your answers to the same three questions we ask all of our guests. So first, let me just ask, what has been your biggest discovery while traveling?
So the biggest discovery I made while traveling, it was actually a pretty hard time in my life. I'd been fired and broken up with on the same morning, if you can believe that. And I ended up in India for about a month and a half. And on that trip, I made a really important discovery that I've really been able to carry with me since, which was that I'm in charge of my own happiness, and that nobody else is going to be looking out for that as much as I should be, and that I needed to live my life accordingly. So that was my biggest discovery.
Listeners, I think you'll agree that might be one of the best answers to that question we've ever had. My goodness. Is India the breakup place, like the breakup recovery place?
I guess so. I'd always wanted to go to India, and I just had been in the Bay Area for a while, and it was as close to an answer of the opposite of the Bay Area as I could find. So that's how I ended up there.
Got it. Fantastic. And what's the favorite place then that you've been to?
I would say my favorite place I've been to is Vieques, which is an island off of an island in Puerto Rico. It's the world's brightest bioluminescent bay, and amazing overgrown sugar plantation jungles you can crawl around in, and some of the most beautiful beaches I've ever seen.
Oh my goodness. That's a place I have not been to. I've been to Puerto Rico, but I haven't been to the island. And what's the next place that you're traveling to?
So actually just this weekend, I'm going to go to Happy Valley Ranch, which is a hip camp about an hour north of the Bay Area in Healdsburg. And it's got a beautiful glamping tent that looks out over hundreds of acres, and a pool. But what I'm most excited about is an outdoor bathtub.
Oh, my goodness.
So that's what I'm doing this weekend. I'm so excited.
I used to have a friend that worked at a winery in Healdsburg. It was fantastic. I actually used to work in Chico and Redding up north there. It's just some gorgeous area. Well, let's talk about Hipcamp. What is it, and what can our listeners do with it?
So Hipcamp unlocks access to private land. We partner with landowners ranging from ranchers, farmers, nonprofits, managers of nature preserves, really a huge spectrum of land. And we essentially partner with them to create entirely new places for people to camp. And by camp, that could be anything from a really kind of wilderness setup where you're bringing your own tent, there's no water, all the way up to gorgeous tree houses with hot showers 50 feet up in the redwoods. So big spectrum of what camping can mean. And listeners can either go to hipcamp.com and find their next great outdoor adventure. We've got all sorts of filters so they can make sure to find the place they're looking for. Maybe they want to bring their dog or go somewhere with surfing. All that is possible on Hipcamp. And then if someone owns land, it's free to sign up. We've got a great insurance program, and we can basically partner with you to activate a new income stream for your land, and also, put you in a situation to share your land with people who are going to really appreciate it and love nature, and just in general provide a really great experience for everybody.
Interesting, and to be honest, I had never heard of it until a couple of weeks ago, but it sort of sounds like Airbnb for camping.
Yeah, that's definitely one way to put it. I think we're really similar in business model in terms of kind of the basic marketplace model where, our hosts set their own prices. It's free to sign up. We just take a commission on bookings that we send or connect. But it's really different in that, our whole company's mission is to get more people outside. And so we're totally focused on nature and connecting people with the outdoors. And so I think from that comes a very different culture and community.
Interesting. And so you can make it as rugged or sort of as luxurious of an outdoor experience as you want, it sounds like.
Yeah, and actually, one of our company values is inclusivity. So we are certainly not the outdoors people that judge you if what you really want is to glamp with a hot shower. We really have a full spectrum there for people.
I love that. And we're talking about diversity of experiences when you're going camping, but you've definitely got an experience, diversity rather, of experiences on the lands. I mean, I was looking on the website and you've got farms and ranches. I saw a beekeeper operation that you could stay next to, a vineyard, even a pecan farm. I mean, my goodness, where do you find these places?
Increasingly they're finding us, which is so exciting. But yeah, we do a bunch of research to find landowners who we think would be a great fit for the platform. And we are really looking for, again, nature. And again, we take a really inclusive definition of nature. So for Hipcamp, nature isn't just, untouched wilderness, but we're actually fascinated by the nature where humans are living in harmony with the land. And in many cases, making the land better, either through restoration or through really, bio-friendly permaculture type food production, like the beekeeping you're talking about. And we find that our campers love these experiences. They're really unique. Where else can you go camp by a beautiful river and then eat fresh eggs that were, made on the land that you're staying at? We like to think about it as kind of often bringing the table to the farm instead of bringing the farm to your table.
Right, so you're not just getting camping, you're getting a whole experience. Although I have to admit, I failed to look at the listing for the beekeeper operation to see if they actually offered free honey in the morning for my toast or something. I mean, wouldn't that be something?
They probably do. So many of our hosts are, of course, the extra income's a big help. So many of these people, I think, are really just unsung conservation heroes. They're taking amazing care of hundreds of acres. In many cases, they've dedicated their lives to doing so. And the extra income's a big help in that vision. But, they're also just so excited to have people out there enjoying their land that so many of them offer things like, free muffins in the morning or a free tour of the farm. I was just hearing yesterday about someone who's been offering foraging classes on the woods behind her land because she knows how to find pine nuts. And I just think it's amazing what, people know and what they're excited to share with our community.
So I'm not going to be finding national parks or the embassy suites on your site, right? These are just all lands that previously I wouldn't be able to reserve a spot on for camping.
Yeah, that's right. We actually do list the public campgrounds, both as a resource for discovery as well as just a point of reference. So you will find state and national park campgrounds on Hipcamp as well.
And can we book them on Hipcamp, or we have to go to the national park?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Coming soon.
Coming soon. That's a tease, listeners. Yeah, you can stay tuned. And listeners, we are featuring this startup because we just find it so interesting, and we also think it may be useful for you as a travel trend. So in full disclosure, no compensation changing hands here. We invited Alyssa on, and we're so glad we did. And Alyssa, you actually have a pretty cool story about how you started the company. It all started with a wave. Is that right? Tell us about it.
Yeah. It's funny. It was my birthday yesterday, and my team actually gave me a wave carved with wood for that exact reason, which made me laugh.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, so it did all start with a wave. I grew up camping in California. My whole life was really fortunate to have a family that prioritized time outside. And when I started planning my own camping trips, I was just so frustrated. In particular, there was one camping trip that I decided to plan very last minute. Everything was booked up, which was really frustrating. I almost gave up. And after many hours of planning, finally chose a campground, got out there and discovered that despite all my research and all my reading, I'd failed to learn that this campground was home to an amazing surf break. And I hadn't brought my surfboard. I'd actually taken it out of my car right before driving to the campground. So started Hipcamp originally just as a way for campers to support each other in finding the best places to get outside. And through that process, learned there was kind of this fundamental problem of not enough campsites. And at first, that seemed like a pretty insurmountable challenge, to be honest. My first solution was actually to go to state parks and ask them to build more campgrounds, and was really trying to think through, these new generations of people who we need to make sure they're connected to land. People only protect what they love. If they're not getting into nature, I think it's unrealistic to expect them to really be passionate about protecting it. And so just kept going and going, and finally hit upon this idea of, oh my gosh, we could partner with all these beautiful landowners. We were driving around and looking at beautiful ranches and vineyards, and it was suddenly like, wait, those could be campsites too. And so working with landowners and really creating more places for people to get outside is something that we started doing 2 years ago, and it's really taken off. It's exciting to see.
So how do you even start getting a roster of landowners? I mean, did you go knocking door to door, farm to farm?
Pretty much. It
Wow.
was really, really hard to get started as a brand people hadn't heard of. It was asking people to essentially open their private property to strangers. Was definitely a big ask. A lot changed for us though when we got our insurance policy. So we got this great liability insurance policy that protects all of our hosts for up to $1 million in any liability claim arising from a camping trip. And as soon as we had that, it was like a switch flipped, because the truth is so many of these people who own these beautiful properties, like I said, they're so proud of their land. They take such great care of it. And they've thought about this themselves. A lot of them already thought about it. They just could never afford the insurance. It wouldn't make sense financially, or they didn't know how to do all the marketing. And so for a company like ours to say, well, we don't have the land, but we can take care of these things. It's a really great partnership, and something that, ever since we had that insurance policy to offer has really been taking off.
Where did the name come from?
The name came from a friend. And it really speaks to, I think a space that for far too long has been very stagnant and hasn't had a lot of change. And I think especially in a world where technology and urbanization are just, taking over so much of our daily lives, I think kind of a fresh approach to nature and making nature more a part of people's daily lives, and making nature feel more accessible to people who traditionally perhaps don't feel included in the outdoors culture is of the utmost importance. So it's really about kind of a new take on camping and a new way to get outside.
Well, certainly people are finding it. Hipcamp says it now has 3.5 million users. Certainly that's a measure of success. And right now, Alyssa, I think you have, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but 308,791 campsites listed in all 50 states.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Wow. And you're getting more, I would assume, every day. You say they're starting to find you.
Yeah, so it's been really fun over the last couple of years to see a shift of, us really having to, like you said, basically knock on people's doors, to now people coming to us and saying, well, I heard my friend, was hosting with you guys and had a great experience, and I'd love to learn more. And that's really been to us the ultimate validation in terms of, are we providing a great experience? That's something that is really important to us. Actually, our first and most important company value is offering a great experience. And we know that if we offer a great experience, people tend to spread the word. And that's a lot of what's driving our growth today.
So do your campers leave reviews for the hosts, and do the hosts leave reviews for them?
Yeah, so the campers leave a review for their host. And our hosts actually don't leave reviews for campers. They can definitely report any, bad behavior, which happens very rarely. But for now, we've actually found that most people are hosting enough campers that they don't want to review them all. So we're looking at a good solution there just to build more trust up in the marketplace. But for now, it's a one-way review.
Interesting. I suppose in some ways, while not ideal, it could be a good problem to have, that you just have so many customers and so many campers that you can't keep up with them all.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of our hosts have asked us, please don't make me write a review for each of these people. Because a lot of times they don't even meet. It's funny. Some of the properties are really, an experience where you are really going to meet the host and spend time together. But a lot of these properties are also, you might just get a gate code and some really good directions, and you might not meet the host. So they just, I think, feel a bit weird reviewing people they didn't meet.
We were taking a look at your list of the top 100 unbooked campgrounds across the country a few days ago. And we were just talking about unique sites. So there were some really unique sites. There was a cabin near the Voyage Report where we're based here in D.C., located by the Hazel River in Culpeper, Virginia. Gorgeous area. I'm curious about your favorite. Certainly you've stayed probably at a lot of these campsites. Is that? I know I'm asking you to pick favorites, and proud parents never like to pick favorites. But do you have one that you just really love or have gone back to?
I have so many I love and go back to, so I definitely couldn't pick a single favorite. I could say my favorite I've discovered in the last week that I stayed at. Perhaps I was up in Washington, not DC, but Washington State, and I found a campsite called The Landing, which was right on a river. And I'm just a huge water fan, a huge river fan, and I got to really just, sleeping by the sound of a rushing river and waking up and having a beautiful river beach without other people on it was a really special experience. And I think the one you're talking about, the cabin at River Hills, has a similar setup where you're right on a river, tons of privacy because you're on a big private property, and you get to listen to the river while you sleep, which is just as good as it gets, in my opinion.
Well, what's so unique here is that it is these areas, as you've described, that were previously inaccessible to the public. It's not like you could camp here on any other year. If it was 10 years ago, you wouldn't be able to camp here. And that sort of unlocks an experience, as you were talking about, that travelers may not have had before.
Exactly. I think, it's really funny because when you're looking at private land and kind of driving around, I think so much of it does feel off limits or, you feel unwelcome. But the reality is, from what we've learned is while it's not every landowner's dream to host members of the community on their land, for so many of these landowners, like I think they would almost do it for free. Like, of course, the money's great, but just having people enjoy their land and get to experience what they get to experience every day, I think is something that they're so excited about to really, inspire people for a love of nature. It's amazing to see what a great fit it is, really, of people who need time in nature and people who have this land and are excited to offer that.
Listeners, Hipcamp is living up to its name, Hip Online. You can find them not only at hipcamp.com, but on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest at Hipcamp, on Twitter at Hipcampers, and on Spotify under Hip Camping. So, Alyssa, why would a homeowner or a campsite owner list with you and not another site, let's say Airbnb or HomeAway or a camping app like All Stays? What does Hipcamp do that these popular sites and apps don't? I mean, how do you compete?
Sure, yeah. So I think the biggest thing is really the intent of the host. So if you're, looking for people who are going to be excited about nature and are coming to your property for kind of access to the outdoors, Hipcamp is by far and away your best option. That's what we've built our community and our culture around. These are people who aren't going to, show up and say, oh, the sheets aren't totally perfect or this doesn't have all the amenities I wanted. These are people who are coming for the river, for the forest, for the views. And so that's really our kind of competitive advantage, I would say, is our community and what they care about. If you have a home and you're looking to rent out your home, I would say Hipcamp is not the right platform for you. We're really looking for places people go to get outside. So that could be a cabin. We definitely list yurts and cabin and tree houses, but the majority of our inventory is campsites, and I think we do the best job at that out there.
Speaking of competing, do you think that you compete with national parks, state parks, and public lands for bookings, whether those be 6 months in advance or last minute? Or do you think you have such a separate offer here that there really is no competition?
Yeah, I think I don't look at it as competitive at all. I think when you look at our national parks, they're so over capacity. They're so booked up that in many cases, I think, Hipcamp's really creating an opportunity for people to visit those parks that might not otherwise be able to. We've got a lot of, great Hipcamps right outside the entrance to national parks. For example, I was just speaking with the superintendent of Joshua Tree National Park a couple weeks ago, and he was saying how much he appreciated having the Hipcamps right outside Joshua Tree because that meant, we're essentially increasing his capacity without him having to do any extra work.
Wow.
So he was excited about that. And then I think in general, a lot of our campers, aren't people who would maybe feel comfortable in a traditional campground for a various list of reasons. And so I think a lot of our campers are people who are getting outside for the first time. And so I think we're actually creating a much larger market for people who are excited about camping and nature in general.
I'm going to wait for the siren to pass.
Sure. Are you in DC?
I am in DC, and we have a little studio here, but for some reason the walls are so thin you can still hear sirens when they pass by. It's ridiculous. DC is like the land of sirens.
Yeah,
if they
I'm
go to
sure.
get water, they have to put the siren on. It's crazy. Well, now, one of our contributors tried to make a reservation at a national park not too long ago, and I guess that they were surprised to find out that there's usually like a scramble 12 months, 6 months in advance to book a lot of these national parks. I didn't really know that there was such a scramble for those.
Yeah, and it's great. I think that the excitement and interest around camping at our national parks is a very exciting trend that I hope is only just beginning. From my perspective, what is most important for really our culture is that when people want to get outside, they're able to do so. I think anytime someone wants to go outside, the positive impacts of that experience are likely to be, so far reaching from, improving their own personal health and well-being to inspiring in them a love for the outdoors and protecting it to, supporting local rural economies. I mean, there's just so many good things that come from wanting to get outside. We just want to make sure that when people, want to go outside and they realize, oh, shoot, I was supposed to book 6 or 12 months ago, that they're still able to go. And then, furthermore, create lots of reasons for them to get outside, to your earlier point about the pecan farm and the bee farmers and the, campsites with the private rivers. These are all reasons to go camping that might really be on top of just, wanting to get into nature. These are really unique experiences, and we hope get people outside a lot more often.
Procrastinators, this site might be for you then, if you've waited too long to book your public land site. Listeners, we're going to be asking Alyssa a little later on for her personal tips for travelers, whether you're a frequent vacationer or more of an infrequent traveler, so you'll want to keep listening for that. Alyssa, Hurricane Harvey devastated parts of Texas and Louisiana a few weeks ago. You had asked your host to open up their sites for free to Harvey survivors. How did that go, and were they willing to do that?
Yeah, it was kind of one of those like late night ideas where I was reading a friend's Facebook. I had the opportunity to visit Texas last spring and made some friends down there, and I was just reading through her Facebook and really kind of trying to empathize with how dramatic this storm is in their lives. And a lot of people are not able to return to their homes right now and are in these kind of really terrible positions. And I realize we've got all these landowners who have, cabins or spaces for RVs or maybe extra tents. And, just kind of on a whim, emailed our hosts in Texas to say, no pressure, but if you wanted to host some evacuees from Harvey, we'd love to just help connect the dots and then provide our insurance to cover it for you. And I got, just in the first couple minutes, like 10 people who were like, yes, we would
Wow.
love to do this right away. And so it was, our community is amazing. I already knew that, but it was really heartwarming to just see how many people were excited to, raise their hand and with no revenue incentive at all, just excited to, support the people who are impacted by this storm in the way that they can. So.
And I think a lot of the big hotel brands were allowing guests to donate points to relief organizations. I think Airbnb also made some of its sites free for survivors of the hurricane. Speaking of current events, how was the Great American Total Solar Eclipse for business? I would imagine pretty good.
Yeah, the solar eclipse was really good. It was actually our biggest weekend by 3x.
Oh my goodness, 3 times the normal business.
Yeah, so it
Wow.
was pretty crazy and pretty exciting. It was funny because we've had a lot of events kind of come our way that seemed like potentially, good marketing opportunities, but in general, we've really stayed away because, I think for our brand and for what we care about, we're not accommodations, or we're not trying to be that at all. We're trying to be access to nature. And so for a lot of events, like say a big, music festival, it's not really about nature. So we don't really want to do any marketing around that. But, the more I read about the eclipse and thought about it, I was like, well, this is probably the most incredible and awesome natural phenomenon out there. So of course this is about nature. And because of that, we did a lot of proactive marketing around it, and we're able to connect thousands and thousands of people with incredible places to get outside and enjoy the eclipse.
Well, you were such a savvy CEO to make sure there was an eclipse just to be able to help your business. So, whoever you talked to get that solar eclipse scheduled for 2017, way to go. You'll have to
Thank
wait
you.
till I think 2024 for the next one in the
You know,
U.S.
in the US, but Patagonia 2019. We're already
Oh,
excited.
do you have sites? Do you have sites?
We plan to by 2019.
Oh, look at that, listeners. There you go. Book now. Stay tuned. So, a lot of travelers these days, as you sort of have mentioned, are really looking to do eco trips or sustainable trips where they reduce their impact on the environment. And I wonder, do you actively market to that? Is that just a feature? How has that related to your business?
We market to that a little bit for sure. I think maybe not explicitly, but implicitly in our brand. I think that's something a lot of people are definitely, connecting with. The cool thing about staying on a hip camp, I think, is it's not just about, minimizing your impact or trying to be sustainable. I actually look at it as, all the way on the other side of the spectrum where you're actually doing an activity that I would consider regenerative. You're actually, paying money that's going directly into the hands of a landowner who is, in many cases, actively working to restore their ecosystem and their land. So it's not just travel that's, not bad for the world. It's travel that's really good for the world and can really support many of these landowners in their quest to, protect their land. I'm actually looking right now in our office at this letter. I have a rancher not too far from San Francisco that gave me a letter from a land development company. And this land development company sent them a letter. And basically it says, we've identified your property as a really good, opportunity for us to build a big hotel or a housing development. You could, get millions and millions of dollars. So basically like, put your pitchfork down, stop working so hard and come enjoy your reward. And she gave me the letter because she said she gets these all the time and she hates them because, they're actually working, like I said, to actively restore their watershed. They're planting native plants, they're clearing out brush, they're bringing in, really good animals that are helping kind of restore the land. And she doesn't want to see it turn into a big, housing development at all. But some months she doesn't know, how she's going to make her mortgage. And so she gets these letters and kind of struggles with them. But since joining Hipcamp, she said these letters have now turned into junk mail for her. And so she gave me the letter to take back to her office. And I really, think about that a lot in terms of the impact that our campers are having on these hosts, just, providing that income stream, really rewarding them for taking such great care of their land and providing an economic incentive to not develop their land, I think is a really powerful force. We're excited to scale across the world.
What a great story. Certainly provides a little pat on the back or validation of what you're doing. How long did it take for you to get campsites in all 50 states across the U.S.?
So we've been doing this for about 2 years now, so just over 2 years. And I'm not sure exactly when we hit that 50 state mark, but I would say within the first year or so, we definitely had a good assortment of campsites, certainly from coast to coast. And then over the last year or so, we've really been seeing great growth in a lot of new markets like Denver and the kind of Great Lakes, Chicago area, Texas, Seattle and Portland, kind of the Northeast, a lot around DC and Boston. So it's been really just in the last, I would say, 6 months that the inventory's really started to build out in those areas.
Hipcamp has been featured in Forbes, the New York Times, and TechCrunch. Alyssa, is it profitable? Are you going to be around long term, or is this a flash in the pan?
We are definitely here for the long term. One thing really important to me from a strategy perspective is that although we've raised venture capital in the past and we're likely to raise venture capital again in the future, we're always running the company in a way such that we're never going to need that additional capital. We're always scaling the company as our revenues are scaling, and we're growing really quickly. We're making revenue, and so that's how we're running the company.
Do you have a goal for profitability?
I think profitability is a really interesting question when you're focused on expanding across the whole world. To me, the goal is less about reaching profitability and more about always knowing that if that's the path we want to take, that we can get there well before the capital in our bank runs out. Because to expand, to go into new markets, we're going to have to invest in those new markets. And since we are just now kind of starting to really be expanding across the United States, and we have 194 countries left to go, I think it'll be a while till we're actually profitable. But I think that the choice to become profitable is something that we'll always have on the table.
A lot of big companies have followed that business plan. Amazon.com, one of the most famous, they were not profitable for years, and that was their model as well. So what if our
They're
listeners...
still not.
Yeah, they may not be. I don't know. They just bought Whole Foods, so now they have 13 billion more in debt. What if our listeners are landowners and they want to list their property? You mentioned that there is no fee.
Yeah, so they can go to hipcamp.com and sign up to host. It's a really simple process. We've got awesome experts here who can talk to you and answer any questions. We do have an insurance and liability program that'll cover you from any liability claims. And then, I think one of the coolest things we can offer landowners will actually pay a photographer, a field scout, to come out. And this field scout will not only take beautiful photos to help us market your property, they can also be your, trial run test camper and provide great feedback on your property, any insights on, changes you might want to make or pricing modifications. And that's something that really helps people feel, prepared and excited for their first campers.
Were you ever a field scout in the very beginning?
My photography skills are not up to par. But I've definitely visited a lot of hosts and provided, the second part of that, which is the, feedback and kind of insight on how their listing is set up. But I never got paid like our field scout photographers do for their beautiful photography.
Such is the responsibility of being the founder and CEO.
Exactly.
Listeners, it's time to get Alyssa's travel tips that you can use in your journey, wherever it may be. So, Alyssa, what is your advice for both the frequent and the infrequent traveler?
So as already discussed on this episode, I'm a bit of a procrastinator. And I think travel is one of the cases where that actually serves me quite well. Something I've always been enjoyed on my travels and that I always advise people is to not make too many plans. I think it's really hard when you're, in your hometown on your computer trying to figure out where you're really going to want to go in some faraway city or country. And what I found is just get there. Maybe book the first night. If you're, you need to know where you're going to sleep the first night. For some people, that's their comfort level. But then stop there. Like maybe have some ideas of places you'd like to end up. But what I found is, unless you're going to a very popular destination in the height of its high season, once you get on the ground, you're much more likely to find a more local place to stay. You're going to hear about adventures you didn't even know about. And I think it's always a bummer if you show up and you're like, oh, well, I can't go engage in any of these new amazing things I'm learning about from people who actually live here because I've already planned all these probably far more touristy things to do. So I think just less planning and more openness to new activities and new adventures and new friends is always my favorite way to travel.
I love that advice. As a broadcast journalist for almost 20 years now, usually I'm reporting for newscasts, and they start on the second, and my entire life is down to the second and the minute. But when I travel, I don't like to plan. I'll just maybe book the airline ticket and worry about everything else later. And
Nice.
a lot of my friends are just sort of befuddled. And, well, how many tours have you booked? And I said, I don't like tours. Like, I don't like tour groups. And, I just sort of want to go where the wind takes me. And I want to be walking through a park and run into a local and chat about where the best place to go eat or where to take a little quick river cruise or taxi on the water. And so I totally agree with you. I think that when you allow fate to sort of take over and you open up your mind to discovery, I just think the travel can be so much more rewarding.
Yeah, and more, I really look at it if you're willing to take this kind of leap of faith, you really get to co-create your travel with the country or the city or the locals of that place. And I think that's so much more interesting and really authentic than, buying all the experiences ahead of time through some travel agency. I think it's really exciting just to get there and see what's going on.
perhaps a lot more authentic than it would have been had you booked it from 6,000 miles away or something like that. Listeners, you can find Hipcamp online at hipcamp.com, on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest at Hipcamp, and on Twitter at Hipcampers, and on Spotify at Hipcamping. Alyssa Ravasio is the founder and CEO of Hipcamp. Alyssa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Listeners, have you used Hipcamp? Are you going to try it? Is there another site or app you love to use on your journey? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We'd sure appreciate your review. It helps bring more awareness to our journalism and original content. And if you have an idea for a future guest on our podcast, please reach out at voyagereport.com and let us know. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Albert. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.